Well, since 1949, Washington's provided Israel with more than $120 billion in financial aid. The annual donation is around $3 billion, sometimes more, sometimes less. Friends don't give non-friends that much money. And surely Washington will never roast Netanyahu over something like this.
This is an anti-Israel administration. It's the first administration in American history that is obviously anti-Israel. It's borderline a Jew-hating administration. There can be no question at this point that the daylight that has been created between the United States and Israel has emboldened Israel's enemies and enemies of the United States.
How do you say that? I mean, that Iron Dome system, Ben, that they are using so effectively in Israel tonight was largely funded in part by the United States, hundreds of millions of dollars under President Barack Obama.
Well, the President of the United States still is going to sign over money to Israel because it's politically unpalatable not to do so.
The truth is, Mr. President, your policy in Israel is unsustainable. The American people are on the side of Israel and Israel's right to defend herself. Mr. President, whose side are you on?
Your father was right. We are all Jews.
After 10 months of talking, Washington has agreed a record $38 billion military aid package for Israel.
This is the single largest pledge of military assistance to any country in U.S. history. It's a reminder of the United States' unshakable commitment to Israel's security.
I'd like to thank President Obama and his administration for this historic deal. I also thank our many, many friends in the American Congress and the American people for their support.
With President Obama in his final year, yay! He may be the worst thing to ever happen to Israel, believe me. Believe me.
Well, let's talk about, Cynthia, there are many reports that talks about the influence of the Israeli lobby, the AIPAC, on United States politics in general. Did you experience anything in that realm as far as what one would call the interference in American policy by AIPAC?
Yes, I first-handedly and also frontally was assaulted by the presence of the pro-Israel lobby to such an extent.
Physically assaulted?
Well, politically assaulted, to such an extent that my father had to ask the question publicly, what does Stone Mountain, Georgia have to do with Israel? What I was doing was servicing the needs of my constituents, and I was not allowed to do that because I did not toe the line on U.S. policy for Israel.
What line is that they wanted? Were you told directly that you had to toe a line, or explain that to me?
Well, every candidate for Congress at that time had a pledge. They were given a pledge to sign. And I was new on the scene. And so the pledge had Jerusalem as the capital city.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
The military superiority of Israel.
American Congress people have to sign this pledge.
Yes, you sign the pledge. If you don't sign the pledge, you don't get money. So, for example, it was almost like water torture for me. My parents observed this. I would get a call, and the person on the other end of the phone would say, I want to do a fundraiser for you. And then we would get into the planning. I would get really excited because, of course, you have to have money in order to run a campaign. And then 2 weeks, 3 weeks into the planning, they would say, did you sign the pledge? And then I would say, no, I didn't sign the pledge. And then my fundraiser would go kaput.
So, well, I just want to get into this pledge a little bit more. So this is basically something that is mandatory, that every congressperson has to sign, saying that, what, Jerusalem, you said, is the capital of Israel, and what else?
You make a commitment that you will vote to support the military superiority of Israel.
We will stand up to Iran's aggressive push to destabilize and dominate the region. Iran is a very big problem and will continue to be, but if I'm not elected president, I know how to deal with trouble, and believe me, that's why I'm going to be elected president, folks.
That the economic assistance that Israel wants, that you would vote to provide that.
This isn't a question for the congresspeople serving, that they are representing, or they're supposed to be representing, the people of the United States, not a foreign country, and yet they have to pledge allegiance to a foreign state.
That's what
no one questions this.
That's what I was asked to do. And I made it public. This probably nobody had said anything about it, but I made it public, and then, you know, the excuse was, well, you know, those were just overzealous advocates for Israel. So then the tactic changed, and but this is what is done for 535 members of the United States Congress. 100 senators, 435 members of the House of Representatives have to now write a paragraph, which basically says the same thing. So it's not a pledge, but it's a paragraph, and you post it, and, you know, there are these forums you have to go to at the synagogues or whatever. And then, you know, if you don't perform appropriately, then you don't get money to run your campaign. The problem is that it requires an awful lot of money to run a campaign.
Telephone number for those guys that were on the campaign with me during the 2002 election, and I wanted to get a copy of your tape of those commercials that had run. Give me a call. I'm in office 326-8844. Thank you. What AIPAC did, some members of the United States Congress, rather, they put in resolutions condemning Libya, and they just kept them in the resolutions with Syria and with Iran and with Iraq. They kept putting them in that in resolution, and kept pushing for all kinds of sanctions, all kinds of action against them. And of course, I voted against the resolution, and others started voting against it. And I think what later I found out, what really made them angry, other members of Congress came to me and wanted to know what was happening, and I was telling them, we're trying to negotiate.
So what happened?
I was looking at CNN. Several people had called me and told me what they had seen and heard, and they told me, look at CNN. And they flooded the radio and TV with commercials. Those commercials, and you have to understand the mode that the country was in. We had just gone through 9/11, and most Americans didn't know Hussein from Gaddafi or Gaddafi from bin Laden. They didn't know the difference. They all saw them as the same. And the commercial, many commercials, put me with them, saying I supported them.
Support and finance international terror network.
It had image of the airplanes flying into the World Trade Center. I tell you, I was dropping rapidly in the polls. We had continued polling. I was dropping rapidly in the polling. I tell you, it was, you have to admit it was well planned and they executed it. Afterthought, it said, my goodness, they had it together. I lost the election. But you have to understand, you're talking about a forbidden subject. No one wants to talk about Jews. It's a no-no. It's like you're talking about something that's wrong. You're not even supposed to give your opinion.
So you think it's very difficult for me to even ask questions about the Israel lobby in Washington?
Absolutely. Very difficult to get answers. Very difficult to get interviews. I hope you're successful. I wish you well. It's going to be rough.
Again, there's a new Hitler, and he's the president of Iran, and he intends to build nuclear weapons, and his brazen declarations against the Jews in America have been carried on the front pages of America's newspapers. Ladies and gentlemen, we must demonstrate courage. We must demonstrate intellectual honesty. We must demonstrate the willingness to stand up and to speak out. We must act now to stop Iran before the maniacal dream of exterminating the Jewish people becomes a nuclear holocaust. And I am hopeful that the American government will have the courage to help Israel in its day of adversity against tyrants. I don't think there's ever a time that you can say you have enough support. I think that our objective is to always let our elected officials know that, A, we do support Israel, and that if anyone comes against Israel in a malicious way, we would do everything in our power to see that that was their last term in office.
I'm a United States Senator. I'm not an Israeli senator. I'm a United States Senator. I support Israel. But my first interest, because I take an oath of office to the Constitution of the United States, not to a president, not to a party, not to Israel.
Hagel's record is very, very troubling on the nation of Israel. He has not been a friend to Israel.
Senator Chuck Hagel is a top candidate to become the new defense secretary in the second Obama administration, but there is some opposition questioning Hagel's support for Israel.
Chuck Hagel, if confirmed to be Secretary of Defense, would be the most antagonistic Secretary of Defense toward the state of Israel in our nation's history.
Just yesterday, there was a new speech that they believe in which, during the question and answer at Rutgers University, he claimed that the State Department was controlled by the Israeli government. It was the Israeli Foreign Ministry controls the State
what they're
Department.
doing is they're going after every...
The state is, well, there's two things wrong with that. One is that it's you know, kind of suggesting Israeli powers controlling things. Number two is that of all the branches of the government, the State Department being the most pro-Israel branch is ridiculous.
Based on every statement I've heard out of any Republican in the last 2 years, the Israelis are controlling our government.
Not the State Department, that's for sure.
Okay.
The U.S. gives Israel $15 million a day and billions annually for decades, a wealthy country that recently refused President Obama's demand to stop the settlements, an important first step to ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a conflict that makes Americans unsafe, according to General Petraeus. Do you wonder why nothing gets resolved in the Middle East? Money and powerful lobby influence. For peace, pressure your Democratic leaders to vote for me at the May convention. I'll fight to stop the endless funding for Israel and for lobby reform. I'm Lee Whitnum, candidate for the United States Senate, and I approve this message.
Jeffrey Leeds and former Secretary of State Colin Powell, in which he acknowledges that Israel has, quote, he says, 200 nuclear weapons. And the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty has not been signed by Israel. Under U.S. law, the United States should cut off support to Israel because it's a nuclear power that has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, according to Colin Powell, correct?
Shouldn't you ask Colin Powell that? I'm not going to speak to this particular traffic, and I'm certainly
So
not
you're saying
going to
Israel
discuss.
doesn't have nuclear weapons?
I'm certainly not going to discuss matters of intelligence from the podium, and I have no comment on that.
Okay. Well, the email says the boys in Tehran know Israel has 200 We targeted on Tehran, and we have thousands. I mean, that seems to indicate that there's a knowledge of an Israeli nuclear program, which would make U.S. aid to Israel illegal.
I think I've answered your question.
Okay, well, let me ask, is that, do I have the correct understanding of U.S. law that we're not allowed to support a nuclear power that has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty?
Look, we obviously support the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. I'm not a legal expert on all the tenets of it, and I'm certainly not going to speak about the details that you've revealed here in this email traffic. That would be inappropriate for me to discuss one way or the other. I'm not going to do it.
There were sanctions imposed on North Korea in response to their nuclear proliferation. There were sanctions put on Iran in response to allegations of nuclear proliferation. And now we have this email from Colin Powell saying that Israel has 200 nuclear weapons. Why is Israel not facing any consequence for this?
That's a very colorful way of getting back to the same question you just asked me. But I'm going to refer you back to the transcript when you see it this afternoon to what I said before to your question.
The latest poll out of Iowa shows that former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich and Texas Congressman Ron Paul are tied for first place. Mitt Romney is now a clear third. And while the media is still not covering Congressman Paul fairly, the Republican establishment seems to run from the man. One of the most common stated reasons is that many on the right say they are uncomfortable with what they call Congressman Paul's clear anti-Israel stance. But is Ron Paul really anti-Israel? Tonight, the facts and a reality check you won't see anywhere else. So how real is the concern over Congressman Ron Paul's position on Israel? Real enough that the Republican Jewish Coalition last week told the congressman that he was not invited to speak at a candidates forum, even though every other Republican candidate was invited. The same group also banned the congressman from speaking in 2007 as well. Now, let me just say that a private organization, the Republican Jewish Coalition, doesn't have to invite anyone. But what reason did the RJC give for excluding Paul? Well, they cited his, quote, misguided and extreme views on Israel. Tonight, we're going to take a look at 3 of those views. Now, there is plenty on the internet about Ron Paul's beliefs, but most of that has been debunked. Instead of using conjecture, tonight I'm looking at actual statements the congressman has made. Let's begin with the criticism of it's all Israel's fault, the idea that Ron Paul blames Israel for terror waged against it. Here's a video clip that reportedly proves it.
Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you say, well, yeah, that was better then and it served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage the Palestinians to have a free election. They do, and they elect Hamas.
The author of the blog where this was posted says that this is proof that Congressman Paul is anti-Israel. After all, he blames Israel for attacks from Hamas. He blames the United States for Hamas. But what does the congressman say? He says blowback, the military and intelligence term for consequence for foreign policy and interventions, is something the United States doesn't want to deal with, and yet is very real. But let's go further. Is he factually correct in what he said about Hamas? Yes. According to Anver Cohen, who worked for the Israeli government in religious affairs in Gaza for decades, he says it was 30 years ago when Israel tolerated and in some cases encouraged Hamas as a counterweight to the secular nationalists of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO. So, it would be incorrect to say that Congressman Paul is blaming Israel for bombings by Hamas. Rather, his position appears to be warning about the consequence of blowback in both American and Israeli foreign policy. Which brings us to the second issue. Clearly, Ron Paul is anti-Israel, detractors say. After all, he wants to deny Israel foreign aid.
To me, foreign aid is taking money from poor people in this country and giving it to rich people in poor countries, and it becomes weapons of war, essentially. No matter how well motivated it is.
Congressman Paul, would you cut aid to Israel?
I would cut all foreign aid. I would treat everybody equally and fairly.
My name is Councilman Charles Barron, and I'm out here to join the Secretary General of the United Nations, who said that this response by Israel to Hamas's violence was disproportionate. And I want to join others in the world who are condemning Israel strongly. This act of killing innocent women and children 370 was the last count that I had. 1,400 severely injured because you're responding to rocket attacks, when in fact the attack on Gaza happened seriously on November 5th, when Israel attacked and blockade shut off all trucks from coming in and out. They said that trucks, the average truck in October, truck delivery for food and medicine and other vital things in Gaza, the average delivery is about 123 trucks per day. It is now down to 4.6 trucks per day delivering necessities of life, from food, water, everything they need. The banks are collapsing, the hospitals are closing. So in fact, before any rocket launches, Gaza was a death camp. Gaza was a death camp set up by Israel. Innocent women and children dying, not getting medicine and food. So Lou had y'all signing on to something he didn't even read, and it's based upon, he said someone told him that they went to the conference and someone's outside the conference handing out Zionism equals racism pamphlets. Well, people could do that. That's their right to do that. People could speak and say it's a hatred conference. Ask him to show you in the document that anti-Semitism exists. He can't do it, he didn't read it, and it's not there. So I encourage you to take your name off that bill. Thank you.
Durban 1 was intended to be a wonderful thing, a conference to fight hatred and racism in this world, and it turned into what the Canadian government called a hate fest. Countries walked out, the United States walked out. Copies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion were handed out. A Holocaust denial program was canceled because they couldn't secure it. People were carrying pictures of Adolf Hitler and swastikas. Durban 2, which most of the free world did not attend, had one featured speaker, our good friend, the anti-American, anti-Semitic, homophobic president of Iran, who used the occasion to deny the Holocaust. And I frankly don't think that that's something that we ought to be celebrating the 10th anniversary of. Hatred, racism, bigotry, and prejudice ought to be abhorred, and no less so when they're directed at Jews.
How can educated people today believe the nonsense spewed by BDS about Israel? Well, that shouldn't surprise you either. Some of history's most influential thinkers and writers, Voltaire, Dostoevsky, T.S. Eliot, many, many others, spread the most preposterous lies about the Jewish people. It's hard to shed prejudices that have been ingrained in consciousness over millennia. And from antiquity to the Middle Ages to modern times, Jews were boycotted, discriminated against, and singled out. Today, the singling out of the Jewish people has turned into the singling out of the Jewish state. So you see, attempts to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel, the most threatened democracy on earth, are simply the latest chapter in the long and dark history of anti-Semitism. Those who wear the BDS label should be treated exactly as we treat any anti-Semite or bigot. They should be exposed and condemned. The boycotters should be boycotted.
If you boycott against Israel, New York will boycott you. If you divert revenues from Israel, New York will divert revenues from you. If you sanction Israel, New York will sanction you. Period.
What happened today in the UN? The United States blocked the attempt in the Security Council to hold Israel accountable. It's always done that. It's going to continue to do that. You see, as long as the Israeli lobby has the financial power to elect the United States Congress and the President of the United States, the American government will do nothing. The United States would have to take AIPAC and make it register as a foreign agent so that it couldn't purchase our elections. But if it did that, they would just create another organization.
I imagine you're talking about AIPAC here?
Yes. So as long as they own the Congress, they own the government. They own the presidency. Look who's the chief of staff of the White House. So you've got, there's nothing going to be done about this. And what's happening, in fact, everybody's now saying, oh, there's two sides to the story. So you've already bought the Israeli propaganda.
This week, a man named Charles Freeman, a man with a long and distinguished career in the U.S. Foreign Service, withdrew his name from consideration to be the chairman of the National Intelligence Council, a key intelligence job. In doing so, he blamed, and I quote here, the Israel lobby for his decision to pull his own nomination. He accused the so-called Israel lobby of character assassination, a willful distortion of the record, and an utter disregard of the truth. Strong charges. His opponents, of course, had strong charges of their own, accusing him of anti-Israeli bias, even anti-Semitism. To answer these charges and to discuss these issues, Charles Freeman is my guest today. Now, in making these accusations, Freeman has pushed to the forefront a topic that previously had been discussed only among academics, policy wonks, and bloggers, and even there it's been controversial. The basic charge is that lobbies supporting Israel wield too much power, which results in the U.S. blindly supporting Israel even when it's wrong.
I don't think that I've been in any respect excessively or unreasonably critical of Israel. I think I have been critical of Israeli policy. And the atmosphere is such in this country now that whereas Israelis in Israel routinely criticize policies they think may prove to be suicidal for their country, those who criticize the same policies here for the same reasons are subject to political reprisal.
And but your feeling is that you could see the hand of supporters of Israel, supporters of the right wing in Israel, as you describe it, in derailing your nomination or raising the controversy. You said in your statement, you said the emails make it clear, the blogs make it clear.
No, and this morning, indeed, there were various postings by the organizations that organized the campaign, the Zionist Organization of America, for example, detailing or setting out in considerable detail how they organized research to find material that they could use to agitate first congressmen who were sympathetic to them and later others on various issues. And of course they do not admit, but it is a fact that they engaged in a truly libelous campaign of selective misquotation and distortion and fabrication of facts that are absolutely not real.
Let me just read the quote because I think many people will want to hear more about how you think about this. You said, "We have paid heavily and often in treasure in the past for our unflinching support and unstinting subsidies of Israel's approach to managing its relations with the Arabs. 5 years ago, we began to pay with the blood of our citizens here at home." And the 5 years ago, of course, refers to 9/11. So you see our support for Israel as having produced a kind of a tidal wave of hostility that then in some way did cause 9/11. Isn't it fair to say?
I think we are paying a price because our actions have catalyzed, perhaps not caused, but catalyzed a radicalization of Arab and Muslim politics that facilitates the activities of terrorists with global reach like those who struck us on 9/11.
You and I got into this on my radio show, and I am shocked, frankly disappointed, and these remarks sound like the conspiratorial anti-Semitic remarks of people that we have heard from over the years. And what you said was, quote, talking about Israel and, quote, Jewish people, they're controlling much of our foreign policy, they're influencing much of our domestic policy. What do you mean by that? Because that sounds to me like a bizarre conspiracy theory. Why would you say something like that when it's just, first of all, patently untrue?
Number one, I served in Congress for 17 years. I've seen members question bills and votes on how does Israel feel about this. I must have heard that every time there was a significant vote. But Israel, through its lobby, has manifested so much power over the United States Congress that we're embroiled in wars that I don't believe we should be. Our kids are coming back in body bags. And in the long run, this Israeli lobby is going to hurt Israel. So as soon as you mention Israel, someone claims you're an anti-Semite. The truth of the matter is, I'm pro-American, Sean, and I don't know, I don't like, hear me. Hear me.
Listening.
I don't like what's happening in America today.
All right, that's fair.
Our kids are coming back in body bags.
Wait a minute, but you're saying
we're bankrupt, completely broke.
But you're suggesting here that we're fighting wars on behalf of Israel. But you just mentioned the 9/11 attacks.
I think a lot of that has been influenced by
Hear me
Israel.
now, Congressman.
But our policies in the Mideast have been so one-sided and subjective. Without objectivity, we've created so many enemies, the only way they can strike back is we've imported the terrorists from those actions.
Wait a minute.
So if you question it, you're saying you're an anti-Semite.
No, that's not what you did. That's not what you said. You said they're controlling our foreign policy, they're controlling our domestic policy.
Yes, and I believe they are.
Hear me now.
I believe they control the Senate and the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
That's insane.
And they're controlling our foreign policy.
Congressman, that's conspiratorial nutjob stuff.
I know you need ratings, but just hold it.
I have ratings.
I'm not saying we should be friends over there with anybody. I'm saying we should be objective. We have developed serious enemies from a one-sided policy. And yes, I believe Israel, through their lobby, has manifested total power of the Congress of the United States.
Power.
And my concern is that taxpayers and the citizens of the United States should control their government, not a foreign entity.
To suggest, as you're doing here tonight, that they control our Congress, that, quote, they are influencing and the sole control of influencing of our domestic policy is an absurdity. It sounds like you are a kook.
Sean, I'm not suggesting it. I'm telling it. Yes, I believe they manifest a great power over America. Let me also say, in the last 4 years, there are 2 separate incidents of AIPAC spying on America. We even conducted a search warrant on AIPAC headquarters. Now, I don't like what's going on here. All I'm telling you is, I'm concerned about America. You and I might disagree.
Will you back down from, quote, they are controlling much, meaning the Israelis, they are controlling much of our foreign policy. Will you back off that statement?
No, I don't.
All right, then we disagree. Congressman, thanks for being with us.
The Benjamin Netanyahu address was 10% speaking, 90% clapping. In fact, there wasn't a chair in the room that got warm for even a minute. But that was not enough for some people. The Washington Post's Jennifer Rubin said that one man in particular had not been nearly as clappy as he should have been. That is Rand Paul. Here are some of the tweets that she sent out, culled from many tweets that she sent attacking Rand Paul. So he sent out saying something that he was in support of Israel. She said, then why would you seriously contemplate containment or propose a budget that cuts aid, including aid to Israel? She said he was unenthused. He was lifelessly applauding Bibi. Oops, almost like he's been faking his support for Israel until now. Ooh, with admirable retweet numbers there. She's doing pretty well for herself on Twitter. She said Paul's staff complains that he clapped plenty during the speech. Fair. Real question should be about record and positions. But that is after multiple tweets saying that that man had not clapped nearly enough.
Yeah, I thought maybe that she meant the position of his claps. Like, okay, fine, he did clap over 50 times, that's not bad, but not enthusiastically. He didn't do enough of enthusiastic meathead claps like this, oh, let's go, BB, let's go, B-I, 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 B-I.
I would have liked to have seen a whoo, 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 whoo. That would have shown proper enthusiasm for a foreign leader.
No Arsenio Hall
Not
whoops
at all. And you know he watched that show back in the day.
Okay, look at how absurd this is, man. Look at how crazy this is. In America, if a United States senator does not enthusiastically enough applaud a foreign leader while in the midst of giving him a standing ovation over 50 times, not good enough. You didn't bow down enough to Israel's prime minister.
Yeah.
Political system in the U.S. has been dominated by Israeli lobby for a very, very long time. So much so to the fact that the American people no longer have a voice in their own government, that the Israel lobby has more power and more influence over government policy than American citizens do. But the Likud party has been an unmitigated failure as far as advancing Israeli foreign policy. They've engendered resentment from every civilized country in the world, and especially here in the USA. And Mr. Netanyahu's bad manners of trying to come to the USA without an invitation from the White House via the State Department is unprecedented, and it's very rude for him to treat our president that way.
Mike Harris, is Israel and the United States united, or is Israel serving the long-term interests of the United States in the region?
Well, let me correct the previous guest, Mr. Millett. That is, there is no peace in Gaza. This has been an unmitigated war of genocide against innocent men, women, and children in Gaza, and it's time that the world recognize it for what it is. And if slaughter is the price, you want to call that stability, then you are truly misguided. As far as the U.S. and Israel being united, the divide between the U.S. and Israel grows every single day, and it's predicated on Israel's bad behavior toward the Palestinians and towards its other neighbors. Israel is not a good global citizen, and it never has been, it never will be. In our country here, they practice sedition, and they practice espionage against the U.S. on a daily basis. And they're just not good global citizens. They don't get along with anybody. In the past 1,000 years, this Khazarian mafia has not learned anything since their empire was destroyed. They rebranded themselves as Ashkenazi Jews. They've learned nothing in all of that time. That you can't treat other people inhumanly as they do, and that's really what is losing Israel favor and credibility within the world. The fact that they are so inhumane in their treatment of others.
Joining me now to discuss the rising tensions in the Middle East, former CIA operative, head of the bin Laden tracking unit, Michael Scheuer. Michael, both the British and the United States have reportedly made it very clear to Israel they would prefer that there be no military action taken. What are your thoughts?
Well, we're at least in the United States, we're pretty helpless. If the Israelis attack Iran, the power of AIPAC and the lobby here, they own the Congress, will lead to our support for whatever the Israelis do, I think. And in an odd way, Lou, it doesn't matter whether we approve what the Iranians do or what the Israelis do to Iran or not, because in the Muslim world, both Shias and Sunnis will regard an Israeli attack on Iran as being sanctioned and supported by the United States, even if we claim to the contrary. So America is on the verge of another war no one needs, and a war that can't be won by air power alone. And so it's really a gaping hole we're looking into that's a very dark place.
Bugged phones and leaking documents, it's the stuff of a spy novel, but really they're the details of U.S. government spying on its ally Israel for fear that it was waging too much power on Capitol Hill. This is the Senate Intelligence Committee chairwoman, a Democrat, says the situation in Iraq is too precarious to pull back and leave just 3,000 troops there by the end of the year, as President Obama wants to do. But Senator Feinstein has got it all wrong in Iraq, just as the president is wrong to spy on Israel. Here on all that, Michael Scheuer, good friend of the show, former bin Laden hunter, former CIA career operative. Michael, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom.
Thank you, Judge.
First thing, should we be surprised that the American government, whether it's the intelligence agencies or the FBI, is spying on our allies here in the United States of America? Or is this something that has been going on for years and we just didn't know about it until recently?
Well, if it was a real ally like Canada or Britain or Australia, we would be surprised. But it's a pleasant surprise to me to find out that the FBI is spying on the Israelis. The Israelis are certainly an immensely malign influence in the United States. They steal our technology, they suborn government employees to spy for them and transfer documents, and certainly their influence through U.S. citizen groups like AIPAC on the Congress is politically corrupting. So I think they're perfectly correct to be spying on the Israelis.
Well, what does Benjamin Netanyahu say to President Obama the next time they meet? Why are your people listening to my phone calls? That was me talking to the ambassador while some agent of yours was listening.
Well, Netanyahu will just tell the president what to do and what not to do. That's what Israeli prime ministers do to U.S. presidents. And what will happen in the Congress is the congressmen and women who are owned or at least bribed by AIPAC and other U.S. citizen organizations that support Israel will threaten the FBI with budget cuts or manpower cuts if they don't stop watching the Israelis.
Got it.
Israeli treachery continues. Dozens of Israeli spies have been caught in the United States since the Liberty attack. The most famous was Jonathan Pollard. Even according to the Jewish-descended Secretary of Defense at the time, Caspar Weinberger, the Pollard spy case was the most damaging spy case in the entire history of America. Pollard stole top-secret information on American intelligence operatives and agents in Eastern Europe. The Israelis, in a supreme act of treachery against America, sold their names to the Soviets. Israel directly caused the murder and torture of hundreds of our intelligence agents in Eastern Europe. Some spout that Israel's our only friend in the Middle East. A friend doesn't make terrorist attacks against you, doesn't kill your brave young men, doesn't spy on you and betray you. With a friend like that, you don't need any enemies, and the only reason we have enemies in the Mideast at all is because of support for the terrorist state of Israel, which has brutalized the Palestinians and other peoples in the Mideast for over half of a century. It is not in the American interest to support these Jewish terrorists, a small part of the population of the Mideast, and make enemies of nations with the energy resources so vital to America.
Who all is here, just out of curiosity? I can see the rats have all come out of the woodwork to be with you here. Well, that's good to see.
There is no excuse
for what you did,
for the breaking of a law. Never. There is an explanation, however. Not an excuse, but an explanation.
And that explanation is?
I can give you a number of soft reasons why I was motivated to do what I did.
Soft reasons?
Soft reasons, having to do with a family that was destroyed in the Holocaust, having to do with the realization that this government in the 40s had abandoned the Jewish people to its fate in Europe. My sentence did not reflect proportional justice. It reflected political vengeance, plain and simple.
Among the men who prosecuted you are Mark Richard, Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Stephen Spivak, former Chief of Special Prosecutions, and Abe Sofair, State Department's lawyer. These are three of the chief prosecutors, all of them Jewish Americans.
Yes, and there were
anti-Semites?
And there were capos also during the concentration camps.
Wait. There were Jewish capos during the concentration camps.
Is
that what you're saying about Richard, Spivak, and Sofair?
As far as my personal views are concerned, with Judge Sofair and his involvement in this case, I find it less than admirable.
Why did you sign the plea?
My wife was being held hostage.
How do you mean?
I was told directly that if I did not cooperate by signing the plea agreement, the medical care that she required at the time, basically to live, would not be provided her.
How would you describe the year and a half so far that you've spent in prison, Anne?
I think the only comparison I can make to it is that of what Auschwitz must have been like 47 years ago, in terms of medical treatment, in terms of abuse.
Like if you were going to deny treatment or give someone poor treatment, would you spend tens of thousands of dollars, of the taxpayers' dollars, to send her to one of the finest medical establishments in this country, in the world perhaps?
Well, of course they have to say I'm lying. It seems to be the standard form here in the Bureau of Prisons.
You've compared this to Auschwitz.
Yes, I did.
It's...
And I have not finished telling you the medical atrocities that were extended to me.
But this is not a concentration camp.
When I have to go back in that cell right now, and I have to try to live with myself.
For the rest of your life, perhaps.
God willing, it won't be.
spy accused of passing classified documents to Israel will be released from a federal prison in Butner, North Carolina.
In fact, Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu says Jonathan Pollard has already been released to his family.
Well, to discuss this further, let's go to Los Angeles and talk to James Morris, editor of America-Hijack.com. Welcome, sir. Mr. Morris, first of all, how much does the release of Jonathan Pollard show that Washington is somehow trying to smooth relations with Israel after what appears to be a conflict of opinion between the two allies over Iran's nuclear program?
Well, thank you for having me back on Press TV. What the release of Jonathan Pollard really shows is the influence of the Israel lobby. Yet again, you've got the U.S. intelligence services, and there are many patriots in America First patriots with the U.S. intelligence services who have been against the release of Jonathan Pollard, because I was just in touch with a friend, Phil Giraldi. He was a former CIA directorate for Turkey, and he had mentioned that it is believed that Jonathan Pollard has a photographic memory, and that the concern with the U.S. intelligence services is that he has in his mind, possibly, much more than what has been conveyed in the documents that he leaked to Israel. And that is the concern. Yes, his parole is up, or his probation is up in November, the end of the year, but the situation is this. President Obama and the Obama administration does not have to release him. And so in doing so, if this is the case, and the New York Times has reported that it is with other media, the Obama administration is going against the suggestion and advice of the U.S. intelligence services, and that is not to release him. He should be in prison for life. If I had any say in it, he probably would have been executed. He was a traitor.
Does Israel continue to spy on the U.S. at large?
Well, of course. I mean, that's another reason that some suspect that the U.S. intelligence services had had enough and have taken it out on Pollard. Keep in mind the Israeli Hollywood producer, Arnold Molchan. He was the handler for Benjamin Netanyahu smuggling nuclear triggers to Israel from America. So we see Netanyahu here in front of an Israeli-occupied Congress, thanks to Jewish donors like Sheldon Adelson and AIPAC and the rest of the Israel lobby, the neoconservatives, which are the upper echelon of it. But Israel has continued to spy well after the Pollard case. So like Israel lied with the USS Liberty attack when they said that was an accident. We knew that was deliberate. They've lied about the continued spying too.
The people of Israel welcome the release of Jonathan Pollard. As someone who raised his case before successive U.S. presidents many times, I longed for this day. And now, after 3 long and difficult decades, Jonathan is being released. I wish him on this first Sabbath that he's going to spend with his family a lot of joy, a lot of happiness, a lot of peace. May these be the hallmarks of the rest of his life.
Shalom, Israel Republicans. I'm Governor Mike Pence. It's a great honor for Donald Trump and I to stand together with you tonight in support of Israel. And I'm deeply humbled to be speaking to you at this historic time and with all of you there in that special holy place of Jerusalem, the eternal home of the Jewish people. Over the course of this campaign, many people have asked me why our ticket stands so strongly with Israel. Donald Trump and I stand with Israel because Israel's fight is our fight, because Israel's cause is our cause. We stand with Israel for the same reasons good people everywhere stand with Israel. We stand with Israel because her cause is just, because her values are our values, and because her fate is our fate. Israel is not just our strongest ally in the region. As I've said for so many years, Israel is our most cherished ally in the world.
They shouldn't be called an ally. They don't deserve it.
4 days into the 1967 Six-Day War, these men witnessed and survived one of the most deadliest attacks on an American vessel by a close U.S. ally, Israel.
The torpedo entered the ship right about here.
42 years ago, Israeli jet fighter planes and torpedo boats bombarded an American intelligence Navy ship, the USS Liberty, with a series of attacks. The assault lasted 2 hours. According to survivors, killed 34 crewmen, injured over 170 others, and nearly sunk the ship.
The whole story of it being an accident is just not true.
Although for decades the Israelis insist the incident was a case of friendly fire, the victims of the attack confirmed the Israelis were fully aware they were attacking an American ship.
Israel claims that they were not flying a flag and that was a mistaken identity, but I know for myself that we were flying a flag.
A lot of it we believe was covered up, that it was an intentional act by Israel to sink the ship with all hands, no survivors.
Why do you think they would have bombed the ship?
Their next plan was to attack the Golan Heights. So the troops they had on the Sinai now had to be moved to take the Golan Heights. The fact that the Israelis were massacring Egyptian troops, Egyptian prisoners of war. They had so many of them, and once again, they wanted to move all the troops they could to the Syrian border, and they couldn't handle the Egyptian prisoners of war, so they massacred them. So it's perceived that they thought that we were intercepting the fact that that happened.
This is a provocative act of war, would you not agree?
Oh yes, definitely.
What happened? How did the U.S. react when this happened?
USS Saratoga, which was I can't tell you how many miles away, but it was several miles away, launched aircraft to come to our aid once we got the Mayday signal out. And those jets were recalled by McNamara, I believe. They relaunched, and the second wave was called back by President Johnson himself. That he did not want, for whatever reason, did not want the U.S. involved in this on our side.
What do you think that is?
Because I think Israel has too much money and they can have too many controlling interests in our government.
I know there was a conspiracy between our government and Israel at the time, so that's the reason why they didn't pursue it, and why the investigations and the interrogations were done and covered up because of the alliance between Israel and the United States, which I think is wrong. I don't care who they are. You just don't slap a hand for killing 34 guys and wounding over 172 people on board a ship for no apparent reason. As far as I'm concerned, it's just outright murder.
And so that happens, and I don't even blame Israel for this.
But it seems to me that the evidence is pretty strong that there was collusion, at least on the part of President Johnson with the Israeli government. And that's one of the main reasons why some nearly 50 years later now, no one in government will talk about it. I have met congressmen say, yes, I'm fully aware of that. Are you going to conduct an investigation, which is required by Article 1, Section 8, United States Constitution? That is probably not going to take place. And that raises another question. Why is it that we elect people to represent us? They swear to uphold the Constitution, but they pick and choose which articles they want to abide by and which ones they ignore.
Is there anything that you'd want to say, just to wrap this up, if there's anything that you'd like people out there watching this video to know?
Be careful who you elect to government. You know what, we Americans are so inclined to think the good guys still wear white cowboy hats. And you make up your mind and you don't give a rip about the facts. And that's what really upsets me about this last election. We believe Fox News and swallowed what was pre-digested and didn't pay attention to what really is going on.
Are you concerned about Donald Trump's presidency when it comes to his very pro-Israel rhetoric? Because he's made it very clear that he stands by Israel.
I think it is very sinister for the Palestinians. Very sinister for the Palestinians. 2 years ago, in the so-called Intifada, Israel produced proof of underground weapons storage in schools and hospitals. That was just an excuse. I mean, the kill ratio of civilians, 6 100 to 1 Palestinians killed. There were only 3 total Israeli civilians killed. There were 1,800, mostly women and children, killed by those Israeli air attacks. How can you justify that? And now here is a hawk that's being suggested as our next ambassador to Israel. I really fear for the Palestinians.
שהמחיר יהיה כבד מנשוא. כרגע המחיר לא כבד מנשוא. התקפה רבת היקף ברשות הפלסטינית. זה לפחד שהכל מתמוטט.
אבל אז השוק העולם יגיד מה, אתם כובשים? אתה לא מפחד מהעולם, ביבי.
במיוחד היום עם אמריקה, אני יודע מה זה אמריקה. אמריקה זה דבר שאפשר להזיז אותו בקלות, להזיז לכיוון הנכון.
הם אומרים שהם בעדינו, אבל כאילו...
לא יפריעו לו.
אז אם אנחנו עושים את זה משהו, אז הם...
יש שבע, אז נניח שהם אומרים משהו. אז אמרו, 80% מהאמריקאים תומכים בה. זה אבסורד, יש לנו שם תמיכה כזאת, ואנחנו אומרים מה נעשה עם הממשל הוא היה כמו פלסטיני בצורה קיצונית. לא פחדתי להתעמת שם. לא פחדתי להתעמת עם קלינטון. לא פחדתי להתעמת עם ארון. בלעם הכי את המחיר הבינלאומי אני משלם. אז עדיף לקרוא לקבל תמורה. תמורה לאגרה.
Oded Yanon is the Israeli scholar who put forth the paper, A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s. And in that paper, it's a plan that's outlined to basically divide up the Arab world, and Iran too, I believe, into smaller states with the idea that smaller states are weaker states and therefore easier to dominate and control. The goal is divide and conquer. If people are pitted against each other and fighting each other, then they are basically, their attention is diverted, and it's easier for the empire power to take the resources and subjugate the people, and then you have colonialism. So in this paper, there's basically, it was a right-wing proposal, but nevertheless, you see it coming to pass today with the proposal to divide Iraq into three parts, which is not what Iraqis want. The majority of Iraqis want the occupation to end. They want the restoration of Iraq. A clean break, a new strategy for securing the realm, came afterwards, but also in the spirit of A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s by Oded Yanon. That paper was written, A Clean Break was written by Richard Earl, Douglas Feith, and David Wurmser. All 3 of them had high-ranking positions in the government of Benjamin Netanyahu in 1996, and that paper was written for that administration in Israel. That paper called for 3 major objectives. Cutting off peace talks with Yasser Arafat, it was 1996, keep in mind. Launching military assaults on the occupied territories of Palestine, and those 2 things ended up happening. And the third objective was deposing Saddam Hussein. So, 2002, Richard Earl, Douglas Feith, and David Wurmser are now all high-ranking members of the Bush administration. Richard Earl, head of the Defense Policy Board, which is an advisory group to the Pentagon. A third of its members had ties to companies that got billions of dollars of contracts when we decided to go to war. So again, conflict of interest. But he was involved, and he was a big cheerleader for attacking Iraq. A high-ranking member of the U.S. administration that was formerly a high-ranking member of the Lockwood administration. So Americans need to have that information and then ask themselves, where does their loyalty lie? Whose agenda does this serve? Who does this benefit? Does it benefit the American people? Does it defend American national security to send our troops, including the National Guard, 8,000 miles away? Or are you defending the national security of someone a little bit closer in that neighborhood in the Gulf?
In 1996, a group of neocons wrote a report intended as advice for incoming Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It called for a clean break with the peace process, rolling back Syria and removing Saddam Hussein from power, an important Israeli strategic objective in its own right. Amongst those who contributed, Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith, now number 3 at the Pentagon, David Wurmser, now in the State Department, and MEYRAV Wurmser.
It was no more than a mental exercise done in a think tank by a group of people. Yes, many of us are Jewish. There's no need to apologize for that. Most of us, all of us, in fact, are pro-Israel. Some of us more fiercely so than others. But we have no problem also criticizing Israel.
Well, that paper in 1996, the Clean Break paper, that was the paper that led to accusations of dual loyalty.
There is no dual loyalty.
Arizona, you're on the line. Your comment or question, please.
Hi, I live down the street from John McCain, and I will tell you this. I think the Republicans threw the election because they knew what a mess we were in. But the second part of my call, I'd like to suggest this. Not suggest. We wouldn't be in this mess if we weren't funding wars. And the war in Iraq was for Israel. We go back to a clean break, a new strategy for securing the realm that was written by Douglas Feith, Richard Pearl, the WURMSERs. So basically the Iraq war, which we're spending a tremendous amount of money on, was for Israel, and now we might go into Iran for Israel. Iran is not a threat to the United States. Iraq was not a threat to the United States. They lied to us, and now the U.S. has basically bankrupted itself to fight wars for Israel. And then you have Rahm Emanuel, and I'm so shocked at how fast his whole thing is being covered up. Fox News is reporting that he is not being...
Caller, can I ask you one question? Going forward, in looking at the GOP and the Republicans, what do you think can be done? I mean, there certainly came out of a bad election season, 4 years of the Bush administration. What should the Republicans and the GOP do going forward to sort of repair not only their party, but their reputation?
The Republicans played chess, the Democrats played checkers. But Karl Rove knew exactly what he was doing. He put McCain in, he put Palin in. He knew Palin would attract some of the nutcase, lunatic fringe, but he knew that he was going to lose the election. They knew that all this was going to be blamed on the Democrats. Not that I like the Democrats any better than I like the Republicans. They've accelerated or started most of the wars in the last century. But the bottom line is this. We have Israel controlling U.S. foreign policy. And to the extent that we have bankrupted ourselves, our soldiers are basically a mercenary army for Israel. And Rahm Emanuel fought, well, he didn't fight, supposedly fix the brakes, during the first Persian Gulf War in 1991 for the Israeli Defense Forces.
Okay. Thank you tonight, caller from Arizona. Let's ask that question once again.
That brought us low economically, morally. We went to war against a guy who had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. It was a total pretext. It's inexplicable. And there you go to Cheney, there you go to Bush, there you go to the Jewish neocons who wanted to remake the world. Maybe I can say that because I'm Jewish, and to bring about a certain result in the Middle East.
I'm not really sure that you can.
Okay.
I'm not really sure that you can.
I was sitting in a bar on Capitol Hill, and I was told by a congressional staffer, careful how you use the word neoconservative. People might think you're being anti-Semitic. Can you just explain this for me?
I mean, it's no secret. The majority of neoconservatives have been and remain Jewish. That is a fact. They do not represent a majority of the American Jewish community.
But you think it's legitimate to talk about the pro-Israeli politics of some of the neoconservatives?
Well, I think it's very difficult to understand them if you don't begin at that point. I mean, I should think people would want to talk about that rather openly, because to the extent that you suppress it, and I think there is an attempt by some to suppress it, I think then it festers.
You've expressed some concern over the idea that this is all a conspiracy whipped up by a group of, quotes, neoconservative hawks who are somehow allied to Israel, and you've expressed worries about that. Explain what you're concerned about.
Look, sometimes the word neoconservative is used when what they really would like to say is Jew.
They being?
People who use that kind of language. And as a Jew, I find it offensive.
Well, I want to change my closing statement a little tiny bit in response. You know, I'm appalled that when I talk about the neoconservatives, somehow it's twisted to be some sort of a racist comment. This is documented fact. The neoconservative role in the taking down of Iraq, unnecessary war, is fact. It's not opinion. I'm dealing with whore here who sells his soul to AIPAC, who will say anything for the job. ignorant. His response to what I said was just shocking. I'm speaking documented fact, and I think a zealot.
We need to take a tough love stand with Israel. We already know the reason why we had 9/11. Osama bin Laden was clear in our 9/11 Commission report. One of the bombers was very clear about why we were there. We are the problem here. We support the settlements. Condoleezza Rice was just there, exasperated. The settlements, 150 settlements now, no change. They keep growing. We've got hedge funds here financing settlements. We've got wealthy Americans financing settlements. 4 U.S. presidents condemned the settlements, and yet they still happen. We are hated worldwide because of our blind support amid what's happening there. We need to take a tough love stand with Israel and demand that there's a resolution and that the settlements building stop.
Tom, if I could just note, to imply, as Ms. Whitnum has, that the Israelis are directly or indirectly responsible for 9/11 is nothing shy of abominable and just indicates the extent to which she's not paying attention to what is really going on.
I'm paying a lot of attention. Let me tell you something. Since the Second Intifada began on September 2000, when Ariel Sharon walked into a mosque to get himself elected, creating a riot, so much bloodshed, and 8 times as many Arabs as Israelis have been killed, but that's not the point. The majority of the people in the Middle East, 60% of the population is younger than 30 years old, and they have come of age during this time period, Intifada, which is still going on. It's 8 years. The danger of it is this. They are seething. Getting rid of Osama bin Laden at the top, if you don't get rid of the reasons why people hate us, solves absolutely nothing. Jim talks like that because Jim was just in Israel on a 2-day, 48-hour propaganda building trip. He went there from Greenwich, put his arms around Omer. What was that all about, Jim? Was that to get your funding? Did you have to sign any documents to the AIPAC here?
I didn't sign a single document. I didn't take a dime. I went there because Israel is on the sharp point of the spear that was very important to us, which is how we deal with Islamic extremism. And I felt an obligation to go there and actually talk to people. But again, this election is not about these issues. This election is about energy policy. It is about health care. It is about reasserting our leadership economically so that we have jobs and so that we lead this world once again on things like alternative energy and so that we have a health care system that we can be proud of.
You're changing the topic, Jim. I want to talk about that again. How did you didn't answer the question. How do you go from Greenwich, Connecticut to having your arms around Prime Minister Omer? Nobody leaves and goes to talk to Israel for 48 hours during a campaign. Why did you go? Who was the go-between?
I think I explained that. I set this trip up and it was there to talk to people who are expert on these issues.
We only have 5 minutes left, and there are so many important issues here.
This is the most
one of the ones that relates to
because
this whole...
Because he came back saying...
Excuse me, I really want to move this on.
Tom, he came back and said if Iran attacked Israel, that the
You're not going to set the agenda any further. I'm sorry. We have to stop now, and I have to move it on.
Would be severe. How dare you wage war without listening to our own National Security Council? Recently, Jim Himes returned from a 48-hour Pledge of Allegiance trip to Israel. Immediately, he talked about attacking Iran instead of listening to our own national intelligence estimate, which stated that Iran no longer has a nuclear weapons program. Democrats, your vote for me on August 12 sends a powerful message to Washington. We can break the stranglehold of AIPAC, the Israel lobby, on our politicians. Our country can't afford another unnecessary special interest group war. I'm Lee Whitnum, and I approve this message.
On our Independence line, John, good morning for Michael Scheuer.
Good morning. I, for one, am sick and tired of all these Jews coming on C-SPAN and other stations and pushing us to go to war against our Muslim friends. They're willing to spend the last drop of American blood and treasure to get their way in the world. They have way too much power in this country. People like Wolfowitz and Fife and the other neocons that Jewed us into Iraq, and now we're going to spend the next 60 years rehabilitating our soldiers. I'm sick and tired of it.
John in Franklin, New York. Any comments?
Yeah, I think that, of course, American foreign policy is eventually up to the American people. One of the big things that we've not been able to discuss in this country for the last 30 years is our policy toward the Israelis. Whether we want to be involved in fighting Israel's wars in the future is something that Americans should be able to talk about. They may vote yes. They may want to see their kids killed in Iraq or Yemen or somewhere else to protect Israel. But the question is, we need to talk about it. Ultimately, Israel as a country is of no particular worth to the United States. It doesn't,
you mean strategically?
Strategically. We have no, they have no resources we need. Their manpower is minimal. Their association with us is a negative for the United States. Now, that's a fact.
What is your secret? Because we don't seem to have the hang of that.
The secret is that we have America.
The 500 hours of tapes released today showing what one historian calls Nixon's own dark view of how the world works, where the enemy is not just the communists, it's also the media. Listening in agreement is the Reverend Billy Graham.
This stranglehold has got to be broken, or this country is going to go down the drain. You believe that? Yes, sir. I can't ever say it, but I believe it.
Today, Dr. Graham declined to discuss those remarks, but one historian who has heard the tapes says Nixon was more hardball politician than anti-Jewish.
Nixon had a tribal and a genetic view of politics, and the Jews were a tribe he thought were against him.
Hello?
Reverend Graham.
Hello?
Hello, Mr. President.
Billy, I've had a little trouble reaching you.
Oh, my. Well, I apologize. I've been traveling all over the place.
You know, we've got still got the problems. Wasn't that a horrible thing, those Israelis shooting down that plane? I've just been raising the devil about that because, I mean, it was so stupid. It's so stupid. I mean, to shoot down an unarmed 707, good heavens. I mean, that's worse than what they did at the Olympics, the other side.
Well, this will be an embarrassment for her coming here next week, won't it?
Well, I think it is, yes. But on the other hand, that's going to be her embarrassment, not ours. We didn't do it. Right. But we have to have her, of course. And I've urged the Israelis, of course, privately, that they ought not only to express condolences, but to indicate that they're going to pay reparations for this. They've just got to do it. Well, now, the Israelis, you see, what they do with a thing like this is they lose all of the support that they have in the world, you know. That's right. We're their only friends anyway, you know. No other country is their friend anymore. And now this just raises it's just terrible.
There's two other points. One is the front page of papers over the weekend carried the story that they're talking about expelling all Christians from Israel.
Oh, isn't that nice?
And they are going right after the church, and there's a great deal of feeling beginning to rise in areas where they've had great friendship.
What'll happen out of this if they don't, you know, what I really think is that deep down in this country there is a lot of anti-Semitism, and all this is going to do is stir it up.
It's right under the surface. And
oh, boy.
Right to the top.
That's right. All of our Jewish friends in here, and like Tannenbaum, you tell him he's making a terrible mistake, and that they're going to get the darndest wave of anti-Semitism here if they don't behave. Well, the thing that you've really got to emphasize to him, though, Billy, is this anti-Semitism is stronger than we think, you know. It's unfortunate, but this has happened to the Jews. It happened in Spain, it's happened in Germany, it's happening, and now it's going to happen in America if these people don't start behaving.
Well, you know, I told you one time that the Bible talks about two kinds of Jews. One is called the synagogue of Satan. They're the ones putting out the pornographic literature. They're the ones putting out these obscene films.
Like the thing in Time magazine and then Newsweek.
Ruth canceled both of them.
Boy, I'll tell you, privately, we've got to be very strong with these people.
Have a real hair-letting with Rabbi Tannenbaum and find out exactly. And he I think, basically is our friend. And I want
you could point out this, that there's nothing that I want to do more than to be, I mean, not only a friend of Israel, but a friend of the Jews in this country, but that I have to turn back a terrible tide here if they don't get a hold of it themselves. And it's up to them.
And they better understand it and understand it quick.
Because there are elements in this country, no, not just the Birchers, but a lot of reasonable people are now getting awful sick of it.
They really are.
Don't you think so?
In the church, too. I think what has happened in the church in the last 2 months is almost... they've almost, these denominational leaders, I'm amazed. They are shaken by all this because they've been so pro-Jewish.
Sure.
And the people that have been the most pro-Israel are the ones that are being attacked now by the Jews. And then to come out,
can't figure it out.
They're going to kick all Christians out of Israel is unbelievable.
Can't figure it out. Can't figure it out. Well, it may be they have a death wish. You know, that's been the problems with our Jewish friends for centuries.
And really structuring it into 10 ways that the lobby moves America. Now, I'd like to start off with some figures from a poll that was conducted last week in 4 countries. Statistically significant Google consumer research asking a fundamental question vital for understanding the current situation in the Middle East. And that question was, which of the following do you believe to be true? A, Israelis occupy Palestinian land. B, Palestinians occupy Israeli land. As far as I know, no one's ever asked this question to a statistically significant audience in 4 countries. Our friends across the pond, the Great Brits, 62% of them believe that the Israelis occupy Palestinian land. If you go up to Canada, a majority of that population, 51%, believe that Israelis occupy Palestinian land. If you go down to Mexico and ask, ¿Cuál de las siguientes crees que sea cierto? You'll find that some 55% of Mexicans also believe, the majority, that Israelis occupy Palestinian land. There is only one country in North America that believes the opposite is true, with the majority of us, Americans, 49% believing that in fact Palestinians are the ones doing the occupying. Now, why is it we're so out of sync with these other countries? What is it that we know or are told that they are not? I'd like to remind everybody of a statement that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made back in 2001 that was only really circulated in 2011. And that was that his perception was, as told to West Bank settlers, America is something you can move very easily. Move it in the right direction. They won't get in our way. What was he talking about? What moves America? Why is it, as uncovered by Edward Snowden, that across federal agencies, perhaps unbeknownst to many Americans, that a policy doctrine that the survival of the state of Israel is paramount, the paramount goal of Middle East policy? Well, I would say, many would say, more are saying it's because of the Israel lobby. We've given over $250 billion of aid to Israel, far more than any other country, inflation adjusted, and a large portion of aid is classified. President Obama made a statement at American University that it's now unprecedented, but you can't get the figure for intelligence aid. If it's unprecedented, and we know it military aid, it's either $1.9 billion a year or $13.2 billion if the president adjusted for inflation. But when you ask the CIA, which must be handling intelligence aid to Israel, they say, sorry, that's classified. And we're suing them for that information, by the way. 2014 poll.
And Brian Gumbel says, what are you talking about? You only get $3 billion. And I said, Brian, that's only the foreign aid bill. Look at all the other trade compacts, economic assistance, military assistance. I'm saying this to you right now. Israel gets approximately $15 billion a year from the American taxpayers. That $15 billion is $30,000 for every man, woman, and child. And people in my district are losing their pension benefits. So I was targeted big time. And if someone doesn't look into this, the American people should be ashamed of themselves. When you allow one American to be violated, you threaten the freedoms of every American. And I can't understand this, why no one in Congress is raising their voice. And the reason is very simple. And this may be you don't want to hear, I don't know. And I certainly don't want to hurt you on your show. You have one of the best. You're fair. But I believe that Israel has a powerful stranglehold on the American government. They control both members of the House and the Senate. They have us involved in wars of which we have little or no interest. Our children are coming back in body bags. Our nation is bankrupt over these wars. And if you open your mouth, you get targeted. And if they don't beat you at the poll, they'll put you in prison.
Explain to me what you see as, why you target or why you have a grudge against the Israelis.
The grudge is not necessarily a grudge. It's an objective assessment that no one will have the courage to speak about. They're controlling much of our foreign policy. They're influencing much of our domestic policy. Wolfowitz, as Undersecretary of Defense, manipulated President Bush #2 back into Iraq. They pushed definitely to try and get Bush before he left to move into Iran. We're conducting an expansionist policy of Israel, and everybody's afraid to say it. They control much of the media, they control much of the commerce of the country, and they control powerfully both bodies of the Congress. They own the Congress.
Are you an anti-Semite?
No, I'm not. That's exactly what they're going to say, and I expect that. What I am is an American. And you see, I think America comes first. And we have a one-sided foreign policy in the Mideast. And we've alienated Arabs who have no way of fighting. So what they've done, and I predicted this on the House floor, is they would export violence to America. And they have. They have no other way to fight. I think President Obama knows this. I think he sees this. I think he wants to do something. I think his hands are tied. And I think he's dancing between the raindrops, trying to figure how I can politically machinate some scenario to mitigate these problems. Greta, I'm saying this. America is in danger if America doesn't take back the government.
To be honest, I didn't even know what a Zionist was. All I knew was that I had been asked to sign a pledge for Israel when I first became a candidate for Congress. And after refusing to do so, my congressional career became trench warfare, hand-to-hand combat, just to remain in the Congress. Ever since my refusal to sign that pledge for Israel, the pro-Israel lobby let me know that my political neck was in the hangman's noose. It was the pro-Israel lobby that decided to tighten that noose when I questioned the Bush administration's actions on and after 9/11. When I traveled to Europe and England, I encouraged citizen investigations of 9/11. And I learned that to question 9/11 was to be labeled an anti-Semite. Even more bizarre, those who questioned the tragedy were equated with Holocaust deniers, and I wondered why. By demanding an independent investigation of what happened on September 11th, I became a political pariah. I was vilified in the press, and the noose tightened around my district. The pro-Israel lobby found someone to run against me, gave her over $1 million for her campaign, and then managed to make the election turn out the wrong way for me. Needless to say, I know now what a Zionist is. I'm saddened when I hear people say they are afraid. Afraid of what? Knowing that your government has been hijacked and that those in charge will lie to you? Such knowledge should actually set us free to do what we must to maintain our own dignity. I remember what the Israeli Prime Minister said. He said, "We're all Israelis now." I agree that terrorism is a problem, and I know who the terrorists are. Dick Cheney told us to expect war for the next generation and drew up a list of 60 target countries. General Wesley Clark informed us of Pentagon plans to go to war against 7 countries in 5 years: Iraq, Sudan, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. Syria is in process, and only Lebanon and Iran are left standing. But I'm sure their turn will come soon, too. General Wesley Clark called it a policy coup. He said that there had been a policy coup inside the United States. Not even 1 month ago, the former #2 at the State Department, Lawrence Wilkerson, Colin Powell's right-hand man, said that what has happened in the U.S. is worse than a coup. The U.S. media would have you believe that the U.S. is divided, non-white versus white, Christian versus Muslim. The meme of division is developed by those who write the scripts in order to pit us against each other. That way, we forget to focus on those who planned September 11th, those who profiteer from war and killing, and those who, like cowards, vote to send our young men and women off to fight someone else's wars or worse, remain silent even while whole countries are being destroyed.
Tell us how you make the case for Israel's involvement in the tragic 9/11 attacks.
This followed over into other reports, also there on September 11th, about vans in the area, white vans. In one case, a van was picked up by police and people arrested at the access to a major bridge. The van was filled with explosives, and the two people in it were Israelis. In Bergen, New Jersey, same day, a van with several people in it had set up cameras. Before the first plane hit, they were filming the Twin Towers, and they were celebrating. High fives. It was a good thing for them. Residents called police. Police arrested them. All five were Israelis. What intrigued me, in addition to angering me, was that within days, all of these reports disappeared from the media.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event. Our purpose was to document the event.
Now, when it came to motivation, it's probably a very sad commentary on where we are in the world today, that there are an awful lot of countries and groups out there in the world that have either real or contrived reasons to hate America. It wasn't that way when I was a young man, but then many things weren't the same way now as they were when I was a young man. But almost all of the groups and countries that might want to do this only had a negative reason for doing it. They wanted to hurt us. The Israelis had a positive reason, and it's one that a number of their supporters had talked about from the 1990s on up, and what was called the Project for a New American Century, whose members included, by the way, later Vice President Richard Cheney, later Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, and many of the so-called neoconservatives, most of them Jewish but not all, who came into the first Bush administration. Israel had a positive reason, and it was get the United States involved in a war in the Middle East with a powerful, enraged, anti-Islamic strain within the American public, that they needed a catalytic event to produce this. They even talked about it in terms of another Pearl Harbor is needed to bring the American people into this fight.
And you know, since you just pointed to the 9/11 Commission report, there is an understanding that the primary motivation for 9/11 was U.S. support for Israel's brutal oppression of the Palestinians, also conveyed in the 9/11 Commission report. I guess my question is, how are these two incidents, or theories, so to say, related? And, you know, there are those that will brush off your argument as a conspiracy theory. Are you concerned?
These are not fantasies. They happened. You look at the reports on September 12th of the apprehension of Israelis with vans of explosives and cameras filming the events on September 11. These are not fantasies. And you look at the people riddling the American government, all of the Middle East people in State Defense and the National Security Council, Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Douglas Feith, who used to be a friend of mine, by the way, from Philadelphia. These people were all part of the neoconservative movement. Many of these people are dual U.S.-Israeli nationals. All of their primary allegiance is to Israel. My concern is that I don't much care about other people or other countries. I don't hate anyone in particular. I don't like anyone in particular. I'm an American. My loyalty is strictly to the United States. And I don't care what my ethnicity is or what my ancestry is. My allegiance is that. And my concern is only whether something helps or hurts the United States. And I think anyone who's a citizen of any country can very properly have similar feelings toward their country. What I'm concerned about is what is done to hurt America. And it is very clear that over a period of the last 40-odd years, that the penetration of the American political process, the effective subordination of the Congress in particular to Israel, when an Israeli prime minister can get 29 standing ovations from a Congress that can't give that much support to one of their own presidents, no matter how outlandish the statements, you have something as close to a puppet agency as you're going to find. Our policy in the Middle East has for decades been manipulated increasingly in terms of what benefits Israel and not what benefits the United States, even when that policy is articulated and supported by individuals who are sworn officials of the United States government. And to me, when a sworn official of the United States government, whether or not that person has dual Israeli citizenship, manipulates American policy, contrives crises and tragedies like 9/11, contrives wars like Afghanistan and Iraq, and now tries to get us into a war with Iran, all in the service of Israel, spending American lives in that process, they commit high treason. And they need to be treated in that manner.
In Washington, D.C., Senator Ernest Hollings was moved to declare that Iraq was invaded, as he put it, to secure Israel, and that everybody, that's his word, knows it. Referring to the cowardly reluctance of his congressional colleagues to openly acknowledge this reality, Hollings said that nobody is willing to stand up and say what's going on. Members of Congress, with few exceptions, uncritically support Israel in its policies due to what Hollings called the pressures that we get politically. Americans have paid a high price for the U.S. alliance with Israel. This includes tens of billions of dollars in economic and military aid to the Jewish state, the hundreds of billions of dollars that the Iraq war and occupation have cost, and the deaths there of more than 4,000 American military personnel. Directly and indirectly, America's so-called special relationship with Israel has also generated unprecedented distrust, fear, and loathing of the United States around the world. By supporting Israel and its policies, the United States betrays not only its own national interests, but the principles it claims to embody and defend. In truth, if the United States held Israel to the same standards that it has applied to Iraq, Serbia, and other countries, American bombers and missiles would be blasting Tel Aviv, and American officials would be putting Israeli leaders behind bars for war crimes and crimes against humanity.
to do your dirty work. Oh yeah. I don't wanna do your dirty work no more. I'm a fool to do your dirty work. Oh yeah. Light the candle, put the lock upon the door. You have sent the maid home early like 1,000 times before. Like the castle in his corner in a medieval game, I foresee terrible trouble and I stay here just the same.
When I become president, the days of treating Israel like a second-class citizen will end on day one.
I don't wanna do your dirty work no more. I'm a fool to do your dirty work. Oh yeah.
Thank you.